Hello and welcome to a live deprogram with Keri Smith. I am your host, Keri. Welcome back. I see some regulars in the chat. I think all the mods are here. I saw you guys are having a mod party. That's really fun that everyone made it for this one. Thank you for being here. If you're new, welcome. As always, we welcome people from the left, people who maybe disagree with us. And I hope you're here because today we have a very special show. I wanted to get someone who was a legal expert to come on and give us a nutshell version. For me, for dummies, I was like, I just want to hear Trump trial and verdict, Trump charges and verdict, nutshell for dummies version of what the trial was about, what the charges were about, and why so many are calling the verdict lawfare and saying things like we've crossed the Rubicon and how this changes the political landscape or the election process from now on. So before I get to my very special guest, I just have one quick announcement for the regulars. So book club is coming up. We just announced 2 dates. We had to reschedule the June date. So it's June 6th now. That's this Thursday. I've already heard from many of you, but if you want to be a part of it, we're going to be discussing Logan Lansing and James Lindsay, The Queering of the American Child. This is an excellent book. If you want to better understand the queer theory part of social justice ideology, the queer theory part of woke, this is the book for that. We're talking about it on Thursday at 6:00 Central. It's a private stream. It's a group stream. Everyone, you can be on camera if you want, or you can, turn your camera off. Just email me at deprogrammedpod@gmail.com. Let me know your screen name, and we will get you a link for that book discussion. The next one is in July, and you've got a month and a half for that one. And that's the autobiography of Ben Franklin, which I'm so excited about. Please go get this book. It's very interesting, and it's the most humble. I would say it's like the most humble autobiography that I've ever read or started reading. He's not even really talking about his accomplishments. It's almost like a diary where he's trying to figure out how to replace his vices with virtues and sort of giving advice to his son. So you might be surprised, even if you don't like history, I would recommend you go and get that book and join us in July. So without further ado, my guest today is the host of Potentially Criminal. He is a defense attorney. He talks about all things law and helps to law-splain, if you will, to people like myself. We're very lucky to have him today. Please welcome Sean Martin. Hello, Sean.
Thanks for having me here, Keri. I don't know if I won't use the term law-splain. That's someone else's bag. I just like to provide some information.
Oh,
But
I thought it was just a take on mansplaining.
Not really. No.
Oh,
No.
okay.
I just
White-splaining.
try to explain and do so in a way that doesn't make me look like an idiot. So
Well,
sometimes I succeed.
Well, I was sort of telling people, I told my husband anyway, I wanted a legal expert on, so someone that's, versed in the law to help explain it for dummies. How
Sure.
about that? You're going to
That
explain
works.
it like for dummies, that version
Well,
for me. So,
it'll take a dummy to show other dummies. So spoiler alert in case you guys aren't aware, but former President Trump was convicted last week of all of this entire thing. So let's just get that out of the way.
if you didn't hear,
Yes, if you were not aware.
now a lot of people weren't following
Mhm.
the trial itself. I wasn't really
Yes.
following much of it. I knew it was happening, but I wasn't really interested. It's funny, I get a lot of people who don't know much about my channel, but they would call it a political channel, but it's not really. It's more of a cultural channel. And so I wasn't, talking about the trial. And yet, I heard about the verdict. We all heard about the verdict. So for other people like myself who maybe weren't paying close attention, should we start with like the charges? What was he charged with?
Yeah, I think that's the best place to start. And ultimately for him, I thought I did I not. Oh, I don't have the shared. Sorry. So he was indicted by the people of the state of New York. Now, in depending on your state, just so people understand, um, the people means that's just what it's called. And in like Massachusetts, it'd be the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Donald Trump. In Ohio, it would be just the state of Ohio versus Donald Trump. So, as I explain to people, don't get too wrapped up in the presentation of things. And the one thing that is really going to mind screw a lot of people here today, but also just coming up in the future, is the Supreme Court of the state of New York. Now, why is that actually something important? New York names their courts very differently than everywhere else. The Supreme Court is the trial court. Then there's, in President Trump's case, he's going to appeal. He's going to appeal to the Appellate Division. And then from there, the highest court in the state of New York is the New York Court of Appeals.
Oh, okay.
So it's all named differently, but you guys are going to see weird things here. That doesn't mean he's already at the Supreme Court appealing it. This is the trial court he was in. So I think it's just important for people to understand that.
Quick question here from the chat
Yes.
that probably relates to this, so I'll bring
Mhm.
it up now. Hey, Brahmaville. Brahma says, how does one get convicted on a federal crime in a state court? Is that where it starts? In a state court?
And we'll get to this here because it does
Okay.
when we get to the and that's actually a very good question. And what we do is we got to get to how this is what he's being accused of. So he had 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. And it makes it an E-class felony. In New York, every state is different. In Ohio, we do 1 to 5. In New York, it's A through E, E being the least serious, A being the most serious. Now, what he's been charged with was, the theory is he intended to defraud and intended to commit another crime and aid and conceal the commission thereof. And because they did that by causing a false entry in their business records. And it's invoices for the Donald Trump Revocable Trust and maintained by the Trump Organization. And what they were charging is all the payments made to Michael Cohen.
Okay.
If that's what the issue is. Their argument is that he committed election fraud and fraud is merely just inducing a person to do something under false pretenses that causes harm. Well, their argument is, oh, well, this is what the harm is here. And he defrauded people and committed fraud in the election by interfering in the election and unlawfully messing with it by paying off this hoe.
So if I'm to put this in a nutshell version, they're saying he paid his own money, hush money, to an alleged mistress to tell her to be quiet, and he did it through the lawyer. And because he falsified what that money was for, like in the memo notes or something, that was election fraud because it prevented something from coming out that could have influenced how people voted in the election.
Pretty much. And that's part of their theory. The part of their theory is also there's 3 different things they kind of allege, but they never came out with clearly what it was. That there was tax fraud. Well, nobody's ever been accused of the Trump Organization has not been charged with not paying its taxes. And then there was also state level election fraud. So it was those 3 things they were trying to claim that was happening here.
I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
So did you follow the Twitter files at all when all that behind the scenes communication came out? So in those Twitter files, there was an acknowledgement that they were censoring certain things at the behest of the Biden administration. And one of those things was that they censored and suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story. And a lot of people at the time were saying that's election fraud because you're keeping something from coming out that might influence how people vote in the election.
Yes.
Is that not under the same standard? Wouldn't that be considered election fraud?
You would like it to be that way, but you're not going to get the FBI officials and those people aren't getting frog marched out and charged with felony election interference. I mean, yes, it is. You're 100% correct, but we are not going to see those held responsible pay for their transgressions and interfering with the election.
Okay.
So you like I said, you're 100% correct, but I wish it would happen. Now, he has, this is the first count. The second count is literally the same thing. It's literally the exact same thing. Falsifying business records. That when they talk about each one of these was aiding and concealing the commission thereof and of other crime. and it's in the ledger, and it's all they have all the slips that they use to pay off with Michael Cohen. Now, this was all done as part of one thing. Could they have charged it just as one big count of falsifying business records? Sure. But doing it this way isn't improper because they literally did it 34 times. So that part's not necessarily the lawfare issue. That's merely just prosecutorial discretion. Where it becomes a bit of an issue of lawfare is that this this type of crime, when it's a misdemeanor, is on the same level as shoplifting. That's falsifying business records is a misdemeanor. When you're not doing it in commission of another crime, it's just a misdemeanor like shoplifting.
Okay, so this
So
is something else I had a question about. I
mhm,
heard that this judge has a
mhm.
record, like a 70% track record of taking felony charges and dropping them down to misdemeanors. But in
that
this case, he did the opposite. Is
that is
that
Alvin
true?
Bragg. Alvin Bragg, the DA for
Oh,
Manhattan.
the DA. Okay.
Yes, and if you guys aren't familiar with New York City, each one of the 5 boroughs is a separate county. So there's Brooklyn County, Bronx County, Queens County, and then Manhattan is called New York County. He has made it a habit of dropping those, but he also
Oh.
ran around for his election just like Fannie Willis screaming, I've sued President Trump 100 times. And they made it clear they were going to go after him. And this is something where, yes, it draws into question what's going on, how they're doing it. And one of your commenters, Dan, is correct. Nothing was falsified. Yes, they record his legal expenses. And I would agree.
Oh,
But
because they
that's
didn't it's not like they put in their legal expenses for XYZ. They just said legal expenses.
well, yes, and yes, they did this very clandestinely as far as the trial was going and the way this all occurred. It was done in a very clandestine manner, but
Mhm.
that's how hush money works. Hush money is very clandestine. And there's nothing wrong with paying off a hoe and telling her, shut your trap. Here's your money.
In fact, I'm gonna interrupt you for one
Mhm,
second. Let me take this down for one second
mhm.
because um I wanted to show, let's see if I can show this instead. I think I have to share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. I covered this in my last video, but in case you didn't see it or if you're new here, I wanted to pull it up again because this might shock some people. This is an
Mhm,
article from 2017 in
mhm,
CNN. The headline was Congress paid out $17 million in settlements. Here's why we know so little about the money. Now, this is about hush money, essentially settlement money that was paid to people who had alleged sexual harassment against Congress members. And the thing is, the difference between this and Trump is, well, one, this hasn't been prosecuted. But
mhm,
secondly, this was our money. This was taxpayer money. It came
mhm,
from a fund that we fund, that the taxpayers, the public funds, the Office of Compliance. So this isn't the congressmen taking their own money and paying off, you know, allegations of sexual harassment to make them go away. They're taking the taxpayer money to do that. And so a lot of people look at this and say, Representative Thomas Massey talked about this. This is a huge,
mhm.
crazy. It's not even a double standard. What would you call this? It's worse. What they did is worse. They used taxpayer money.
Oh yeah, no, it's very bad because they get to decide how they're going to settle, how much they settle for, and yeah, it
Yeah.
it's the beauty of the government. It's the beauty of the government.
Okay. I've got one more
Sure.
a comment from Keto and Crime. Hey Tracy, for $5. Tracy says, meanwhile, you can mock murder hoes in video games to hush them up. What a crock.
Yes, you
Oh,
can.
oh, I see. Like in a video game, you can do that. I see.
Yes, that's part of Grand Theft Auto. You can pick
Okay.
up the hooker and then get your money back after you kill her.
So so silly. You would play that, Tracy. Okay.
Now, now, typically, and this is something that even commentators on the left admitted, this is generally only done at a misdemeanor level. The Manhattan DA's office is very good at prosecuting these. They're very good at white collar crime. I mean, they're on par with like the Southern District of New York. They're very good at, because this is one of the major things they do. But doing this created a bit of a Frankenstein of a case. This is, and I read this by it was very interesting because I saw it. It was a CNN commentator, and he admitted this is a very bespoke indictment and a very bespoke criminal case. This was very much tailored for Donald Trump, and you can see it. This is something that's never been done before, and this is not in New York, and this wouldn't happen anywhere else. This really is lawfare at its finest. Somebody figured out a way that kind of worked, and they kind of did a kludge to it, and they made it work. And it's ghetto engineered to work, and it worked well enough, appears.
And can you tell me
Hmm.
about the another thing I heard in addition to it was the DA, thank you for
Hmm.
correcting me, the
Sure.
DA that turned this
Hmm.
into a felony instead of a misdemeanor. I also heard that there was no reason to break it up into 34 counts.
Well, you can if you want to.
Okay.
I'll use the example of, like, if somebody's a drug dealer and they keep selling drugs, and you get a confidential informant, and they go over and make 10 buys. You could smack that guy up as part of one big drug dealing indictment, or you can charge him 10 separate times of selling drugs. It's not really that's not the that's a bit of a just stacking it up and making it look more impressive and scary. And to be
Right.
fair, it's a little psychological warfare and presentation. But I don't that's not the part I have a problem with. The part I have a problem with is they revive these misdemeanors that would have already been barred by the statute of limitations, meaning the time was up on them. There's nothing else they could do with
Because 'Cause
these.
they're 10 years old or something, right?
Well, at this point, they're 6 years old, but
Okay.
that's well past the deadline for a misdemeanor in New York.
Okay.
And they sat there and cobbled together this garbage, and it works. And that's the issue you get to is this isn't what it was meant for. This isn't how I'm sure the people in charge of this isn't are going to say, we didn't intend it for this at the end of the day. But that's where the legislator, is out of the picture at this point. But yes, this is not how the law was meant to be used.
And that's what people mean when they say lawfare.
Yes. Well, lawfare is just using the law for your own political purposes. And there are times where, yes, you can use the law for your political purposes, and it's a valid use of the law. Traditionally, though, and typically, lawfare is used as a way to punish and obstruct and cause problems in the legal process, for the sake of political gain. And this one here is very true. I mean, they even if this gets overturned, which this is a bit of a shaky case, um, they've got their W for now of saying Donald Trump is a felon, the first felon president, and he's running and he's a felon. And this won't get in front of an appeals court for months, for probably over a year minimum, actually, probably a year and a half. And by the time let's say they don't and then let's say even if they overturn it, the state will appeal probably, and it goes to the Supreme Court in New York. That case won't be done until after Trump's second term ends. That's the timeline we're looking at here. And then from there, Trump could appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States after he's exhausted all his state level appeals. They probably wouldn't take it, but even to that point, that's 5.5, 6 years from now. So this lawfare, it got them their goal. They got their W for now, and they're going to run around dancing, singing in the streets over it. The problem is, what was the cost? And this is a very big
Yes.
cost, because now we're bringing it up. It's like drag out all the piddly dick stuff. And I'm sorry to use that word on your show like that, but this is the ticky tack stuff. And if this is what we're going for, it's very much, know, this is, well, we're only reciprocating in kind now.
Can you
And that's where this could
expound
go.
on that a little more? Because that's what I saw
Mhm,
friends like, I think Brahma Bull, who's in the chat, and other people
mhm,
saying, this is irrevocably changed things. We've crossed the
mhm.
Rubicon. This is,
Yes.
we haven't engaged in this before with
Mhm,
political opponents who are running for president. Can you
mhm,
explain that? Especially keep in mind people who might
mhm.
be on the left who were very excited about the guilty verdict. Like, how does this change? I want them to understand what we mean when we say this has changed things going forward.
Well, now it says if there's anything like cobble it together, shaky legal cases, go for it, push the bounds of ethics and prosecution and in legal professional responsibility. Just go for broke now. Start hunting. You find the man and we'll find you the crime.
Yes.
That's where we're getting to. And it's very much like it's very much like with Senator Harry Reid when they started jerking around with the nuclear option and how they were approving justices and judges federally in the Senate. Well, at that point, once they went off the deep end, when the Republicans got in, they said, fine, we're going to like simple majority votes. And guess what? There's now Justice Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Comey Barrett on the bench. So, this is what you get when you start pushing the limits. Well, now you've told the other side it's okay for them to, not only go to that point, but maybe exceed it. Well, now it's our turn to push.
Yeah.
And I don't know, and some people might say the Hunter Biden indictment's a similar bit of lawfare there. And I would agree to an extent. That's a bit of
Mhm.
lawfare as well. Because at the end of the day, based on the Bruin decision from the Supreme Court, Hunter Biden's charges are unconstitutional and they probably should be dismissed right now. They should have been dismissed. And if not, they probably will be on an appeal. But for now, this is meant to drag him through and cause problems for for Joe
Mhm.
Biden going forward, because that's where they're going to get to him.
I've got a super chat here from
Mhm,
Randy. Hey, Randy, for $5. Thank you, Randy. He
mhm.
is kind of echoing what you just said. It's a quote. Give me the man, and I will give you the case against him.
Yes, by Leventry Beria. Yes, he was the head of the NKVD. He was Stalin's head of the NKVD while Stalin was in charge. Stalin and actually referred to him as my Himmler. He was
Wow.
a very nasty man.
Wow.
Yes, and like a lot of communists, had a predilection for little girls.
S I know nothing about him,
No, he
but
was
this
he
is
was an
not.
awful
I
human
hear
being.
something awful, and I'm like, "Sounds right."
If you watch the movie Death of
Uh,
Stalin, it's actually very
okay.
accurate about him.
The Death of Stalin.
It's actually
We're
a
on
very funny movie.
we're on a, history kick right now,
Mhm,
my husband and I, so wait, but you said
mhm.
this was a funny movie?
Yes, it's about Stalin dying, but it's about like Steve Buscemi plays Nikita Khrushchev.
Oh,
There's
okay.
Jeffrey Tambor is in it.
I've never even heard of this.
Jason Isaacs is in it. Yeah, there's a lot of people, and it's actually very good.
Cool, okay, I made a note. I've got 2 more things I just wanted to read to you
Mhm.
quickly. Thank you, Torgo the White, who's been a member for a month. He says, "Don't make us suffer, Sean."
Safa, yes.
And Pirate, "Hey, Pirate," for £5 says, "No kangaroos were injured in the prosecution of Donald Trump."
Well, not that we know of, but it sure seemed like it.
Also, I just Dion, the queen of quotes, is here, and I just like this comment of hers. She said, "Trump was charged with beating Hillary Clinton in
Yes.
2016."
Well, that's part of it for him.
Okay. Do you want me to return to these charges, or should we move
No,
on?
we can leave
Yeah.
him down because it's literally 34 counts of the same thing.
Well, then I want to take this
Mhm.
opportunity to show you this. I don't know if you saw this. If they didn't expand it, if they didn't choose to make it 34 counts instead of one, then these ladies wouldn't have had time. They
I
wouldn't
saw
have
that,
had
yes.
they could have these ladies that wrote guilty 34 times on the sidewalk with chalk, you would have robbed them of
Th
fun.
They're lucky that those guys who don't go run around beating and robbing people didn't attack them because they're not paying attention right at that moment. But
Yeah.
yes, this'll show we've got the orange man now.
We've got him. Let's go
Yes,
write it on the sidewalk.
yes.
Okay. So go ahead.
yeah, so they charged him, and then it was the prosecution of the case. And a lot of this came through as, "Oh my gosh, he's such a bad man. He's the orange man." And it all centered around Stormy Daniels. They brought Stormy Daniels in, and she they let in a lot of things that I think were highly improper. Her actually discussing the actual, like, sex between her and, former President Trump, not just the idea, "Oh, we had an affair at the Harrah's at Lake Tahoe," and that would have been enough, and then he paid me to shut up about it. But they allowed her to come in and talk about a lot of things that were, objected to, that probably were very improper. The other parties involved, Michael Cohen, who at this point now has lied to every branch of the government. He lied to Congress, he's lied to the courts, and he's lied to the DOJ. So he's lied to all three branches of government, literally. He was brought in as one of the big smoking guns. And he even admitted on the stand he's still lying, and he all he does is lie. But yet that was the linchpins for the state of New York. It was just an absolute dumpster fire of a presentation of a case. And yes, Dan is correct. The judge himself had a lot of problems. The judge was very heavy handed in the way he governed the courtroom. His use of the gag order against President Trump, where he couldn't talk, but if Michael Cohen, "Oh, we're scared of him intimidating the witnesses," they go start running their mouth on TikTok, and Trump can't argue about it. So that was a problem. Judge Merchant, I called him Mercant earlier, it's Merchant. He had actually broken New York rules for judges of donating money. It was only like $35, but they still had rules that it should have been done a proper way. And he broke those, showing because it's meant to hide your bias. So you don't show where people can accuse you of bias.
Mm.
His daughter is a Democrat fundraiser. I mean, all these things where he got all upset and hurt that people were finding out, like, okay, this guy's not playing it straight. And yes, it was just problem after problem after problem after problem in this case. And the worst thing of all was he did not allow cameras in the courtroom. So this is just like it being in federal court. We would get the sketch drawings and reporters telling us what happened, which
No
it's not.
transparency.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
it's
we don't, I
interesting.
mean, you have to trust the reporters,
Well,
which I
yes.
don't.
Yes. And I will say, I did see this morning when I was driving to court. Todd Blanche, Trump's lead attorney on everything, all his cases, actually gave an interview. It's only about 56 minutes long, but it's very revealing how he thought the case was going. And he points out it's a tough case because you're in New York City, you are on Manhattan Island. They've got people who they had one juror where they found a TikTok video of her doing a dance when Trump got indicted.
Oh, come
And
on.
and they said, "Well," and here's a bit of an issue when you're doing jury selections. Um, Normally, you would say you want her excused for cause, that it's clear she's not gonna be fair. Well, in Ohio, that probably wouldn't have been a big deal, but in New York, they actually had to go through the motions, and they actually had very limited how New York does things. Every state's different. They had limited strikes on jurors for cause. So he said we had to ask her, like, "Well, do you promise to be fair and impartial?" "Yes." Well, once you say yes, I'm kind of stuck because now the judge is going to say she said she's going to do it. We have to take her at her word. We can't presume she's lying. So these people got on the jury. And
Yeah.
then we had the one person who, "Oh, I use True Social." And I was like, "Do you really?" Like, I find that hard to believe. So there are problems with the jury pool.
Plus, I watched
Hmm.
on Friday the
Yes.
clip of the juror who admitted during that questioning, "Do you think you can be fair and
Hmm.
impartial?" And she admitted she could not. She was a
Hmm.
recent immigrant to the US,
Yes.
and this is a person who they thought would be biased for Trump in his favor.
Hmm.
So she was excused from the jury. And I'm asking anyone on the left who may be watching, just do you really think, like that
Well.
juror who was filmed doing a TikTok dance when he was indicted, do you really think that they were honest during that section about impartiality?
Hmm.
Or I mean,
Well,
come on.
Well, I still think the argument, and this is one I made. I get laughed at by judges every time, but eventually one of them's going to see it my way, or maybe when I become a judge, maybe someday, somebody will make the argument, and I'll agree with them. There is only one party entitled to a fair trial under the United States Constitution. It's not the state. So the idea that there are jurors biased in favor of the defendant is not a problem. Too bad. The prosecutors, well, it's fair. They're biased against the state. And I made this argument in court before when they've tried to excuse jurors. And I point out, like,
Interesting.
that's too bad. That's too bad. The Sixth Amendment does the government does not have the first, you could argue the Ninth and 10th Amendment gives the government rights or protects rights for the government. But otherwise, the government has no Sixth Amendment right. The government has no First Amendment. The government has no Second Amendment or Third Amendment or Fourth Amendment right or Fifth Amendment right. The government doesn't have a Sixth Amendment. The government is not entitled to a fair trial.
So if I'm biased against the government, it's
I think that's fine. If the government can't find 12 people who don't hate them, too effing bad. Too effing bad. If everybody hates you, that's where you need to have that introspection to say, it's like the meme goes on. You've seen that skit before where they're like, Hans, are we the bodies?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, you need to have that introspection to say, well, God, why does everybody hate us? What are we doing wrong? That's how it should be addressed.
I've got a couple of questions for you, Sean,
Sure.
from the chat. This is from my husband. Hey,
Mhm.
Anthony. He says, can potentially criminal explain the aspect of the verdict having to do with the falsifying of records
Yes.
leading to committing another crime that was attached to this?
Yes. So the way I know some people are saying, well, how could they claim these guys were committing another crime? So, like, burglary is a good example. Burglary is breaking into an occupied dwelling with the intent to commit another crime. So you don't have to prove the other crime beyond a reasonable doubt. It's like you're showing what was that person going to do. Oh, I was going to go kill that person, or I was going to go rape them, or steal things, or whatever. That's how you show it. You don't have to. You don't have like a mini trial within the trial to prove the underlying or the predicate. What they were covering up. But they're allowed to show that, and they're allowed to show it was a federal crime because they're not charging him with breaking federal law. They're just saying you broke federal law, therefore you did this in the commission of another crime. So I hope that makes sense out there. I'm not sure if that's what he was asking, but I
I
hope that.
think so. Wait, so they don't have to prove that he interfered with the election. They
Yeah,
just
because
have to say,
there's no way, there would be no way to prove that
right,
ultimately too. But
right.
they show, beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the idea is you've proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the allegation is the crime was election fraud, and that, well, people were and they go in front of the judge like, if people would have known, they would have never voted for the orange man. He was really out there just grabbing pussies, and they think that would have swayed things.
This just brings me back. I know I already made the comparison, but the Hunter
Yeah.
Biden laptop thing is
Mhm.
like, you guys censored that story. Like, you would
Mhm.
not, you censored news organizations right
Mhm.
before the vote,
Yes.
and that doesn't influence how people vote.
Mhm.
But you're saying this does, him, telling an
Mhm.
alleged mistress to be quiet. Yeah,
Yes.
pirate. That's the one they're talking about. Is that it was
Mhm.
in the commission of election fraud,
Mhm.
which they don't have to prove.
Yes.
Okay.
And ultimately, I mean, like, they can prove it and they could show it was done to lie and hide and deceive people, and it was meant to do all of that, sure. And they established that by showing it. They hit all of this, and by doing that, they committed election fraud. But they don't have to, get him convicted of it to show that he broke the law.
I
Is, I
see.
guess, the point. You don't have to. He doesn't need a conviction to sustain that.
I see.
Now, I do agree that this law is very kind of vague. This law's got a bit of issues, and it's like I said, there are some people on the left now who are writing, "Oh yeah, this is a little bad. This probably isn't good." But it's not so bad that they're like, "I don't want the W of Trump being of a felon anymore." but they're just saying, hey guys, in the future we might want to like button this up behind us, which I think is really more of what their angle is ultimately, is like, we should pull the ladder up behind us while we've got the, getting while the getting's good.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that makes sense out there, chat, but I think that's ultimately what a lot of people on the left feel, that like, well, we didn't do this right, but let's make sure we can't get burned by it either.
Right. I have a couple more questions for you.
Yes.
Kevin Anderson. Hey, Kevin. He said, didn't Stormy say in a deposition and in her book that nothing happened?
She said a lot of things, and you think, it's like they suborn perjury. But yes, nothing happened to her.
So
Nothing happened to her.
So why wasn't John Edwards indicted for election fraud? Oh, because he had that mistress he was hiding. Remember that?
Well, John Edwards had a bunch of campaign finance laws that he was charged with, and he got found, and he ended up getting found not guilty on one of the counts, and the judge threw out the rest. And actually, somebody brought that up, so I was double. Don't worry, guys, I don't actually know this in my head. I had to look that up to make sure I knew. John Edwards he was found not guilty of one of the 6 counts, and the judge declared a mistrial on the rest, and they never retried him. But yes, John Edwards did a lot of sketchy stuff down south, and that was part of it. Paying for his mistress and using campaign finance laws to hide things and pay for stuff. So he did get charged. It's just he beat the system.
So you mentioned earlier that there's a time limit, the statute of limitations for a misdemeanor, but because they bumped this up to a felony, then they were able to prosecute. Does that mean potentially, if someone wanted to engage in lawfare against Bill Clinton, for example, that they could go digging decades into the past?
Probably not that far.
Okay.
Generally, the only time you get decades worth of statute of limitations are for sex offenses. And those generally start once the person's 18 years old. The time starts ticking. Like if they're a child, they're not going to be expected to disclose. But once they turn 18, they might have 15 years or whatever. And then obviously murder and homicide offenses, the clock never runs out.
Right.
So, well, and yes, so you're right. Technically for the Clintons, there will be some.
I was about, there's a joke in there somewhere.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes.
The Hillary Clinton joke. Okay. Thank you, Savrix, for the super chat for 1989. It says, whoever controls the airwaves will dictate what people believe or not believe about the election. So even if everyone voted right, the system can just project that it was a left win, and the revolutionaries will then act accordingly. Well, this makes me think of 1984 and the way they just changed the record on everything.
Oh yeah,
Winston Smith.
Well, you have your great your 3 a.m. Bumps. Those are always great too.
Yeah.
Fortify the elections. So yes, they can. All kinds of great things.
Sean, I've started recently, I've explained to people who might be new, who might not know. A lot of people on the left don't know, but there are topics on YouTube that we couldn't talk about for the past few years that would get your videos pulled down, or you'd get strikes.
Just like that one.
And what we're talking about now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've just started talking about everything, because I'm testing to see if they've changed the rules, because I think they might be. Some people told me, looks like they are getting a bit more lax, because they want to be able to say, if it goes the wrong way and Trump wins, they want to be able to say there was election fraud, and so they have to loosen those rules now.
Yes.
So you can say whatever you want, just so you know.
Oh, I know. We've been keeping track, and then you can always talk about maybe you don't have to now just tell people to go consult your medical doctors about things. You can say, hey, some stuff out there does seem a little sus,
right?
We can but there's the funny thing is there's always the tried and true ones you could talk about, like Building 7 or the USS Liberty. We're gonna always talk about those.
Boom, stream goes down.
Yes, those actually survive all the time.
Oh, good. I didn't know.
Yes, you're allowed to talk about those things.
Super Base, I just wanted to say thank you for the 20 memberships, my little membership fairy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the support and your generosity.
And Michelle from Force of Light is here. Hello, pretty lady. Good to see you.
Thanks. Hello.
So, so we talked about the charges. We talked a little bit about the trial itself. Was there more? Because you obviously pay more attention to this trial than I did. Was there more that we should know about the trial, or?
He got done dirty ultimately at the end of the day. I think the judge committed a lot of error there. And Todd Blanche's attorney agrees that there's a lot of appealable issues, and I think there are. This is where I'm just going to tell people, buckle up. Appeals are generally not won. You generally lose on appeal. That's just the nature of the business. I mean, I had an appeal on Friday where I got it was a little different. Usually you get told, because I do a lot of appeals for criminal cases, and those are generally, court appointed, because people can't afford to pay for an appeal, because appeal is thousands upon thousands of dollars after you've already spent thousands of dollars on your defense. And normally they say judgment affirmed, meaning, whatever happened down below, it's all good. On Friday, I got the 4 words you don't normally see: judgment reversed, conviction vacated. So the appeal I wrote, they said, yep, we agree. That was they're reversing the conviction, and we reverse the judgment, and the conviction's vacated. So this guy's no longer convicted anymore, which is cool. But most of the time, you're gonna get the appellant's points are overruled. The judgment of the underlying of the trial court is hereby affirmed. And that's a lot about, for appellate courts, their job is kind of uphold the system. If they overturned everything that was wrong, they would implode. It's just like if everybody went to trial, you would collapse the trial system, the trial courts. If everything the trial courts did wrong or the prosecutor did wrong came back, that would collapse the system. And courts are part of the government at the end of the day. They are one of the 3 branches of government, and the government has an uncanny ability and a massive interest in watching out for itself. So, if you guys are following along with this, keep this 2-word phrase in your mind going forward: harmless error. Meaning, yes, this was wrong. It shouldn't have happened, but he's still guilty, so we don't care. And that is a very common phrase you will see throughout appellate arguments and rulings.
Wait, they're saying a harmless error that led to his conviction, or?
So I'll use an example I did once. I had an appeal. This guy and his buddies, they were hanging out and they were dry firing pistols at each other. So, and this is fake. This is not real. But obviously they'd sit there and they'd pull the slide back and they were going like right at each other. Click.
First rule of gun safety.
Well,
what are you doing?
Well, these guys were high and drunk. So guess what happened at some point? Instead of click, it went boom, and a guy had a hole in his head. And he didn't make it. So the guy he went to trial, and he got convicted of manslaughter. Well, during the closing argument, the prosecutor twice made references to this guy's silence and speaking with the police, which you can't. You have a 5th Amendment right to remain silent. You have a 5th Amendment right to remain silent. They cannot comment on your silence post-arrest. Once you're arrested, they can't talk about it because that's prejudicial. You have the right to do it. The defense attorney immediately objected both times. He went to the judge in the middle of the closing arguments and said, "Your Honor, I want a mistrial." The judge said, "Well, no." And then he told the judge, "Hey, can you give the jury a curative instruction?" And a curative instruction is the judge stops everybody and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," and I have this happen all the time when I'm in trial. If I'm sitting there and we get to closing arguments, if I hear the words the defendant or defense, I almost immediately object, because as the prosecutor, your job's not to talk about what I did or didn't do. Your job's to talk about what you've done, because I could sit there and play Sudoku all day long. It's still their job to furnish enough evidence. So what should have happened is the judge should have said, "Ladies," and I think he should have done a mistrial personally, but he just said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant has a right to remain silent. That right is protected under the 5th Amendment to the United States Constitution, the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and under the Ohio Constitution. He has no obligation to speak to law enforcement at any point in time for any reason."
This is his curative statement to say.
Yes, that's what he should have told the jury. "Listen, this is a correction of it." He never did that.
Okay.
So we get through the appellate arguments, and at the end, the court says, yes, while they did violate his 5th Amendment right, and it was rather troubling the court didn't correct it. The overwhelming amount of evidence shows he was guilty anyway. Harmless error, boom, judgment
Oh,
confirmed.
harmless error.
Guy's in prison for 15 years.
Okay. So
So
they're
that's
probably gonna
what
use that.
harmless error means. The error was harmless. Even if it was a big deal, he was still guilty. Even if we fixed that, he was still going to get convicted.
Okay. So they're probably gonna use that with Trump. Like, if they come up with something during the
Pretty
appeal.
court uses that every time.
Yeah. Okay. So what do we have to expect then? As you kind of already touched on this, the appeal probably won't happen for months and months. The
I mean, it's going to a 3 or 4 day trial takes a court reporter at least 1 to 2, sometimes 3 months, given their trial schedule, because they sit there and they've got their little keyboard thingy and they're typing away, and it's in a bunch of shorthand gibberish, which they then have to translate because they'll sit down and take a look at it and they'll translate it into the proper form. Then they format it and edit it. And that's the record that you use to make your arguments on. Well, this was weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of trial. So it's going to be a lot. And it's not only one court reporter, it's a bunch of different court reporters because they're the big fancy court in New York City. They have court reporters like tag in and out to do the court reporting. Whereas, in in flyover country here in Ohio, the courts I've been in where they have a court reporter, it's just one person sitting there doing it all day long. So it's going to be months for that alone. Then it's going to take months to put together a brief. And then it's going to take months for the prosecutor to respond. And then it's going to take months for the court to take a look at it. Then there are probably going to be oral arguments, which then have to get set out. And then it's going to be even longer for a ruling. And then once that happens, win or lose, whoever wins is great, but whoever loses is going to appeal. So if New York loses, they're probably going to appeal it. It's got to go to the Supreme Court of New York where they're going to appeal it up there. And then you have to do the song and dance with them. And then because the record's been secured, you're just arguing what happened at the appellate court. So now you've condensed it a lot. But now you're going to have to go through and put your brief together. The other side puts their brief together. There's going to be arguments. Then there's going to be an opinion. Yeah, it's a very, very long process.
To be clear, I had some people, I know the answer to this, but I just want to hear from
Sure.
your legal perspective. Some people from outside the states were asking in the comments of my last video, is it possible in the United States for a convicted felon to run for president, for you to vote for him?
Yes. Yes. Eugene Debs ran on the socialist ticket in 1920 from prison and got 1 million votes.
What?
Yeah.
Well, and then
I mean, there's no prohibition on it. There's no prohibition on it.
And then what about potential consequences? Like, is he potentially facing jail time?
Yes, he is. I mean, here's the thing. He's almost 80 years old. He's had no criminal record. These are low-level felonies. There's actually a presumption for probation on all of these. So yes, there's a presumption he would get probation. But the judge could give him, years in prison on each count and smack him up for, 30 years in prison if he wanted to.
What
It's
do you
gonna
get
be
the sense with this judge?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't help that Trump was told to go do a pre-sentence investigation report, which is for the judge. When the judge is looking at your case, he's got, a file folder with a bunch of papers in front of it. That's all he knows about you generally. Well, a pre-sentence investigation report is done by the probation department, and they talk to you and they sit down with you like, what was it, your family history growing up, school, employment history, all the, your physical health, your mental health, all those basic things they can do the research on and confirm things about. They give the judge a better idea, the basic idea of who you are and what might be the proper sentence. They'll interview you and talk to you about the offense sometimes, and then you'll have the right as a defendant to talk about it and give your own statements. So that was being ordered, and Trump was ordered to go take care of it. He didn't do it the same day, which blowing that off is not necessarily the biggest idea because a lot of judges treat that as how well can you follow directions? And if you can't follow directions, why would I put you on probation where you're going to have to follow my directions. So,
Oh, I used to work in talent management. This is
mhm,
like the green M&Ms clause.
yes.
In the
Mhm,
talent writers, a lot of times this is a joke that people would do this, but they really would. The green
mhm,
M&Ms thing came from if you're giving a writer, like in a
mhm,
contract for your client, whether they're a comedian or
mhm,
musician to perform, you give all the specs you want done ahead of time for
mhm,
sound and lights and video and everything. And then somewhere in there you bury and what you want in the green room and all that, and you bury
mhm.
something in there like green M&Ms that's inconsequential sort of, but if they don't get
Yeah.
it, then they didn't pay attention to any details, so
Yes.
how can you trust them on the lights or the sound? So that's kinda similar. There's like, "You
Mhm,
didn't fill this form out."
mhm. And I've had judges where they explain that, ones I've been in front of, where they tell my client, like, I'm going to look at this. This is going to partially help and assist in determining whether or not you could follow my directions. And I've said, okay, here you go. Here's the form. Fill
Mhm.
it out. When you meet with the probation department next week, have it fill it out. If you have questions, call me. And they show up with it out with it not filled out, or they're like, oh, I lost it. And yeah, some judges are like, well, how do I know you can't follow the rules now? Why shouldn't I put you in jail? Why shouldn't I send you to prison? It's a very he is not out of the woods.
Right.
I'd like to think he would get probation for this now, but that is far from guaranteed. It is far from guaranteed.
One of the things I noticed right away, and this is what I was expecting,
Mhm,
but on Friday we talked about how in following the conviction, he
mhm,
saw a jump in fundraising. He
mhm,
raised that night alone, I think it was over $34 million. 30% of
mhm,
those were first time donors to his campaign. And then the next day, I think cumulatively it was over $50 million. In the initial, these are granted, these are online polls, but he seemed to get in several different online polls, he got a jump in his
mhm.
polling numbers. And
Yes.
I've seen this rise in popularity. And then just anecdotally, I have friends of mine, some of whom are libertarians, who said they don't like the libertarian candidate they just elected, so they're voting for him. Especially now, they want to stick it to the man. Also, some anarcho-capitalists and friends of mine who haven't voted in years, who kind of gave up on the system, said they're coming off the bench to vote for him. I know some RFK people who said they're going to vote for him now just to give a big middle finger to the government. So do you think this is gonna hold? Do you think that this increase in popularity is gonna hold throughout his legal troubles leading up to the election? Or might it have the effect that some on the left seemed to want it to have, which is for him to take a hit
I
in
mean,
in
certainly
social
it
credit?
well, I mean, I think for many people on the left, it probably did help give him a hit, but the people who already didn't like Trump didn't really need a reason to hate him more or not like him more. So, I don't think this is gonna sway as many people. Because at the end of the day, it's like when I'm trying to explain this to you, like what this is all about, he paid a hooker to shut up. Like that's it. Stormy's a hoe, and he said, "Shut your mouth, hoe. Here's some hoe money," and she took the hoe money. And then, like a hoe, she wouldn't
Like
shut up
like,
about it.
even if you believe all of this and that it
Yeah.
happened, you're saying what he did
Mhm.
was in comparison to, I mean, the
Mhm.
fact that we just looked at $17 million in payouts of taxpayer money to congressmen
Yeah.
and all these other cases of Democratic politicians who paid
Mhm.
mistresses to be quiet. It's like, why are you
Mhm.
selectively applying the law to this guy?
Yes. Yes, and for a lot of people, they're like, "Well, what did he do? He falsified business records," and they're gonna be like, "Well, did he cheat on his taxes?" Nope. He paid all his taxes. Like it just yeah, it doesn't really change. Nothing changed with the amount of money that went in or out of the organization. So yes, for a lot of people, yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at this as like, okay, big whoop.
Mm,
I I this is not the win they think it is, but certainly it's not helpful. It'd be
right.
better if he didn't have the problem, but
Well, thank you so
mhm.
much, Sean, for
Sure.
being here today. I think I covered most of my questions. If there's anything you want to
Yeah.
add, I do want to thank two
Um
other people. Oh, the
Yeah,
same
no,
person.
the one thing I will say is, like, the idea he could pardon himself, if he were to win.
Oh, I
He can't
hadn't heard that one.
it's a state level offense, so no. Now, I know people are saying, well, there's nothing out there that says he can't. Sure. There's also nothing out there that says I can't glue, sheets of plywood to my arm, start flapping like a bird and jump off a building and that it won't work. It's just by looking at it, the math is not mathing out. He's not going to be able to do that. There's issues with federalism. The idea that if he can pardon me for a state level crime, he's basically the equivalent of my governor, which now
Mhm.
he's like some sort of super governor who does he just have the pardon power of my governor or does he have every other power that my governor has? And that's not how we want that to work. We don't want him to have that kind of power.
A
There
self-pardon. No, I don't want
he could self pardon himself. That's not an issue at the federal level. He totally can pardon himself,
Oh,
and that's simply because it doesn't say he can't. And that's how the Constitution is written. Does it say he can't do it? Nope. Well, then you could do it.
but
I
at the
mean,
state level, you're saying he can't.
at the state level, he
Yeah.
doesn't have the authority, I would argue, to do that because we have a state executive, and the state is a separate sovereign entity. So
We're
there's a lot of things for that. And then somebody else also said, people are saying, well, the Supreme Court needs to step in because they're claiming he broke a federal law. It's like the only way they step in is after Trump has appealed all the way up through New York's government and then applied to the Supreme Court. They're not going to step in now and, Clarence Thomas jumps in there with a big shield like Captain America and is, holding him off and saying, no, you run along, Donnie. I got this.
But I would
Um,
read that comic book if someone wrote it.
yes. Yes.
Thank you, Randy Wallen, for the 2 super chats. One for $10. He says,
Yes.
"The world's not fair. It never
That's
has been
true.
and never will be.
Hmm.
LBJ stole his Senate seat. Or
That's a funny story.
JFK stole votes in Chicago.
Hmm.
It's all just mental masturbation unless sent to write votes en
Yes.
masse."
Yes. LBJ's Senate seat is a very funny
I don't
story.
know that story, but my husband knows about he was reading about JFK in
Mhm.
Chicago.
Yes, Nixon lost by the slimmest of margins in Illinois. Handfuls of votes. It wasn't very much in
And what's
1960.
what's the LBJ story? Is it long
So,
or
no, and actually, there's a picture of it, of the thing. Hold on, let me bring it up. Yes, box 13.
okay?
Let me see if I can find it here.
If you bring it up, I'm gonna read this
Mhm.
next one. Randy
Sure.
also for $5 says, "Vote locally in primaries and in the general. After you vote, shame your right-leaning friends if they don't vote."
Yes. Hmm.
Thank you, Randy.
So
Brahma Bull says, "This will only sway people who believe that the left is going too far. It will sway those people." Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing right now is people
mhm,
who were not planning on voting for him, but now are because they think this is going too far.
mhm. So I've shared. This is precinct box 13. So when LBJ was running for Senate, this was a ballot box in the 1948 election in one of the counties where days after the elections had closed, 200 ballots showed up out of that box. 200 extra ballots. I'm sorry, 206 extra ballots.
Okay.
And 200 of them were for Lyndon Baines Johnson. 6 of them were for the other guy. And that is
Oh,
what pushed him over the top.
wow. This needs to be a famous I mean, it is a famous photo,
It's
but
a
I didn't
very
know about it.
it's a very famous picture.
This needs to be
It's a
something
very,
people
very
are
famous
talking
picture.
about.
Oh, and they were very crooked down there. And yes, that box had 200 extra slips of paper. They just, they're just like, we done shook it out and poof.
And I love that they
Cookies.
put in 6 where they're like, "Hey, we wouldn't have put in any for the
Well,
other guy." It's only 6.
and the funny thing is, instead of a ballot box, nowadays, like, oh, we found a bunch in the trunk of a car, or somebody was just driving around with the extra ballots, or they just mess
Yeah.
with the graph and the graph goes boop, and then that's good enough.
Wow. That's
Yeah, but
amazing. Yeah.
that is a famous box that still exists, and you can see it.
Wow.
Um,
Thank you for that. And thank you, Randy,
yes.
for the chat. This is my husband. He says, for anyone interested, Seymour Hersh's book entitled "The Dark Side of Camelot" details the Kennedy-Nixon race and how Joe
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy sent bags of cash to sheriffs to put up signage via the mob.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, the
History just
Kennedys.
keeps it's like nothing's new under the sun, right? There's
It's just how they do it.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, it's very true. It's a very, very true.
Well, before you go, Sean, can you tell
Mhm.
people a little bit about your channel, where they can find you? We
Yeah,
have a link below in the description. You
sure.
can click on Potentially Criminal, and yeah, just tell people what you've got coming up and what you do there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Keri. So guys, my name's Potentially Criminal. I also go by the name Sean. I'm an attorney here in the Cleveland, Ohio area, and we cover all kinds of topics. Obviously, most of it's criminal related, but other stuff that may pop up if there's something in the Supreme Court, or for example, when P. Diddy got the lawsuit filed against him by the record producer, and they claim all that. I don't know if you've heard about it, all the
I
freaky deaky stuff that was going on there.
Not the
Just
details, though.
oh, it's
Maybe I
not
should
very
bring
good.
you on.
Yeah, it wasn't very
I
good for Diddy. But we cover all kinds of stuff. We do try to focus on criminal things. We do live stream trials that are available. Currently, we're in the middle of the Karen Reed trial. She's a woman in Massachusetts accused of murdering her boyfriend by running him over and leaving him to die in the snow on a January night. And it's so funny because all the witnesses they've talked to are all like, "Oh yeah, I broke my phone or threw it away." Well,
Oh,
and there's a lot of sketchiness to it, but we'll see what happens with it. They're finally getting to the forensic part of what's out there and what may make sense and what doesn't make sense. But we've covered other trials. We covered a lot of different things that are out there. I do a live show also every Thursday at 9:30 Eastern time. The only time zone that matters. And we cover a lot of different topics that happen. For this week, we've already got a couple different things that are going on that are interesting, including out in Colorado just now. A guy was indicted for shaking a baby to death. And the prosecutor went out there and made a bunch of disparaging comments about the guy. And the defense attorney and the defendant filed a motion saying this is prejudicial. And the judge looked at it and said, "Yeah, hey, you're right. You're right. This is prejudicial. Case dismissed."
wow.
Well, that's the judge finally did something right. Like, not just saying naughty, naughty, Mr. Prosecutor, but saying, "Well, now you'll remember not to do this again." And the case was dismissed.
Wow.
And, but I think that's the price it needs to be if you mess with people for their liberties, that now that prosecutor will make sure they don't do that again.
Wow.
Then we have a couple other things, and I'm not sure what other stories we'll have for this week, but that's one of the big ones, one of the juicier ones. And let me see what else here. One I'm also trying to think of. That's really it this week.
Well, the
We'll be catching up with the Karen Reed trial this week.
well, the true crime one's right at my alley, so I'm gonna be
Yeah,
tuning in for that one, the Karen Reed one.
it's really
And
good. It's really good. It's been that said though, it's been 18 days already, and it's just been atrocious.
I have a follow-up one final
Mhm.
question for you from
Yeah,
EHEF, $20. Thank you, EHEF. He says, "What could the GOP do if Trump is sent to prison?"
they could try to put a different nominee out there, or they could stick with him. I mean, they could stick with him if they wanted to, because his sentencing is a couple of days prior to the RNC.
He could run from prison, right?
Yeah, like I said,
And then what happens though
Eugene Debs ran from prison.
if he's elected and he's in
Yeah,
prison, then what happens? Does he get to leave
we'll
the
we'll,
jail?
we'll have we'll have the Rikers White House because he'll be at Rikers Island.
Are you for real?
Well, if he gets sent to jail, that's where it would be, or he might be sent to like the New York prison system. So we'll have like the Sing Sing White House or something like
I'm
that.
so down for this though. If
It
this
would be very
happens,
interesting. It'd be very interesting.
like, I'm still
He
voting
comes
for him.
out and he comes out, they release him and he's just,
He's
you
running the
know,
country from
yes,
prison.
yes, and in between he's like doing dips between stacks of books and just out in the prison yard, he's holding press conferences.
Wow, they really think that it's gonna be enough for us, I think, that to not vote for him. I was look, I've always since the race started, I was for DeSantis, but I always acknowledged, well, if DeSantis is not the nominee, I'm gonna vote
Yes,
for Trump. But I wasn't, like, super excited about it. I have a lot of complaints about him. I barely ever
sure,
talk about him.
sure.
But now I'm very excited to vote for him.
Yeah,
Suddenly, I'm kinda like, because you guys did, You think we're stupid to do this to him, this to engage in unequal application of the law and to target your political opponents in this
Hmm.
way, and that we won't see the hypocrisy and we won't see you
Hmm.
abusing the system. And it makes me sick to my stomach. So
Hmm. Oh,
yeah.
I will say for people out there hoping, well, I'm hoping my DA is going to do it. I'm going to tell you right now, your DA is not going to do it. Your DA might be conservative, Republican, but they're very normie. They are not going to be hunting down people left and right.
The
Yeah.
Texas one, you mean?
None of them, none of them. Your
Oh,
attorney general, your prosecutor, none of those people are generally going to be doing it. And even if they can, even if you're like, you know, Pig Knuckle County, Arkansas, there's probably going to be no crime committed in their county. It's the fact Trump lives in Manhattan is the reason why they even had a chance at sniffing distance of this.
because that DA would do it, Alvin Bragg,
Yes, and it's because Trump lived in the financial capital of the world.
right?
Yes.
Maybe he should live where you live or where I live.
Oh, I will
Yeah.
say when they show those maps, everybody leaving California,
Yeah.
nobody comes to Ohio, and I like
Nobody's
that.
going there.
No, and I like that. We're full. You
Mr.
won't like it
Squiggles
here.
for $5 says, "Will his
Mhm.
Secret Service be able to protect him if he's in jail?"
Yes, but that also brings up a new wrinkle of how do you have Secret Service protection inside of a jail? Because he'll be entitled to it, but does that mean you're imprisoned with your guy like it's a Praetorian Guard situation? Like how does that all work? That's why I think ultimately he probably will get probation just because that's there's going to be so many problems with this, but you never know. You never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, this is wild. Well, thank you
Mhm.
very much, sir, for giving us your
Yeah.
time and your opinion, your expertise. You guys go and subscribe to Potentially Criminal. The links are below. And I will see you guys on Wednesday for Pop Culture with Mystery Chris at 8 o'clock. Thank you, guys.
Bye
Thank you,
everybody.
Sean. Bye.